Dear viewers, welcome with you in this new episode of our program, Dialogue Corradon. In this episode, we are going to talk about the independence of Sudan. And we are going to congratulate all the Sudanese people in the day of the independence. And we are going to talk about 62 years of independence, in which many things happened inside this 62 years, and including the political elites and political arenas. And we're going to talk about the identity of the country and the values of the country, which is changed. And also, we are going to talk about the foreign policies, which is cast its shadow and influence also our policies inside the country. With me here inside the studio is Nahar, Osman Nahar. He is a political analyst. Welcome with you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here.
Okay, and we have also strategic expert, Dr. Hussein Karshom. Welcome with you.
Thank you for your accommodation here, and thank you for the program.
So let me ask you the first question. It is about the independence of Sudan. People struggle for the independence until they gain the independence, and people fight for that. And the colonizer is outside of the country since more than 60 years. Tell me this story, because I wouldn't like to say that you are one of the heroes, but I think that you hear about these stories.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity. Unfortunately, when we talk about independence and we talk about the names and talk about who made the independence, we will talk about the people who gathered in the parliament and declared independence within that building. But this is just the top of the mountain of, I can say, snow mountain. It's only the upper part. But underneath there is a lot of blood, a lot of martyr, a lot of sufferings, accumulative tremendous efforts being made. In Nuba Mountains, there is Ajabna, Feki al-Mirawi, Kobanga in Aliri, Rapa in eastern part of South Kordofan. Far east, there is cluster of Digna in Jazeera. Far north, all Sudanese, ordinary Sudanese contributed to this independence. Ali Abdul Latif, Abdul Fadil al-Mas, all this contributed to the independence of Sudan. And those who, with a white color and white garment, gathered in the parliament and declared the independence, the only a reflection. They paid by lip service for independence, but the real founders of independence of Sudan are those. So I salute the families of all these martyrs and heroes of who made the independence of Sudan.
Okay, so let's go to you, Mr. Nahar. It is about also the independence, grouping people, students, conferences. As your colleague mentioned, that many effort made and then the people gained the independence. How do you look to that in that period of time?
Yes, really, Sudan has the particularity that one of the rare countries in Africa and in the world that chased the colonizer in the 19th century with the Mahdiya revolution. In that time, Sudan was colonized by two powers, the United Kingdom and the Egyptian also, as a protectorate, by protectorate. In that time, Sudan chased these people by force. After that, they recolonized Sudan in 1896. And in this time also, the effort of the Sudanese people to struggle against the invaders didn't stop. Dear Dr. Karshom mentioned some of the heroes, and also I mentioned also even in Darfur, the Masalita Sultanate also in 1916, yes. And Suhaini revolution in Niala also in the 20s of the last century. And before that also, even Darfur as a whole, it was very difficult to penetrate by the colonizer until 1916 after the killing of the late Sultan Ali Dinar. So the effort of Sudanese people to struggle against the invaders and the colonizers was along from 1896 until the date of the independence in 1956. In the whole this period, there is a lot of struggles by peaceful means, by military means, by the popular revolts. All these means contribute at the end of the peaking time and getting the independence.
Okay, so Dr. Karshom, I think that Sudanese people, when they gained independence, it's a big chance for them to go forward in building the country. But unfortunately, more than now 60 years of war and conflict all over the world, all over the Sudan. These conflicts for many reasons. But let me ask you this question first, and then I can go forward. To go forward and to also to describe all these kind of conflicts, and also to speak about the terms. Are Sudanese people now exploit the independence?
Unfortunately, the post-colonialized political arena in Sudan witnessed and accommodated a very weak political parties left behind by the colonizers. Sudan was only accommodated by two political parties. Ummah Party, which is already affiliated to United Kingdom still. The Democratic Unionist, which is aspiring to unify it with Egypt. So when we talk about dependence, what kind of dependence? If the two political what is breathed in the religious sector. So this reflected the fragile political climate and atmosphere, which is abetting and abetting the military to come into political scene and arena, and witnessed by Abood in 1958. So there is a major problem, it's never been addressed, even within this period. They are very busy with their own conflict, internal conflict. The South question is left unanswered, though they appeal for having a conflict system, but they give a deaf ear to the Sudanese problem, which accommodated and resulted in longest war in the modern history, 21 years, resulting in succession of our beloved part of Sudan, South Sudan, and have a new state in 2011. And all these pockets, the period, and in the Darfur, because they didn't address the political cause of Darfurian, and we have what you call the Darfur Front, which is developed later on to become different political opposition, and also the same for the East Sudan, and they have East Abidjan Conference, which is also a seat of opposition. So in a nutshell, these political parties are weak enough to address the Sudanese problem. Yes, it is true that the colonizer left us with the best civil servants, but they didn't build a real political institution that can survive for longest time. As a result of this, we entered into what's called in Sudanese politics the vicious circle, having multi-party political system, abetting the military institution to intervene, and we have a military government, and then we have a transparent period, and then back to political parties. So we are like a fan. We are just rolling about, left with no constitution, permanent constitution. Though Sudan gained independence, the first African countries have independence since 1956. Up to now, we haven't got any permanent constitution, which is reflection of an unpolitical stability, unstable political parties, non-democratic political parties, fragile political parties, and all this a reflection of political unrest around Sudan. So I can say that is unfortunately our founder fathers and elites, they are not bothering enough to build a real political institution. They only confine addressing their own problems rather than addressing the whole Sudan problem.
Okay, so I think that Mr. Nahar, I want to ask you whether you agree or disagree with him, to which extent first. The second question is about how do also you evaluate all this kind of what he said in the measures. Is there errors, for example, and who's assisting this mistake to be
Certainly, there is heroes. There is a lot of heroes for this independence. But from the departure, from the beginning of the independence, there is a false departure, I think, and faux pas. The first thing of all, the people who were in the time as political arena, they didn't come up with agreement to get a permanent constitution. For that reason, when Sudan get independence in 1956, they didn't get a permanent constitution. They went to and make a constituent assembly, and trying through this constituent assembly to get the draft of the permanent constitution. And the internal quarrels between the political forces didn't give them the time until 1958 and the coup d'etat of General Abood, because as Dr. Hussein mentioned, the two big parties are sectarians in their nature, because they are from the sector of Ummah and the others the sector of Khatmiya. And all of them, they have also their ties with external powers, either that is Egypt or the Great Britain. And for that reason, even the two parties, the Ummah party and the Ashiqa party, the Brothers Party, which is created in 1943, the raison d'etre of this party is how to unify with Egypt. The other party, how to get Sudan independent, because they don't see the relation with Egypt in a good eye. That from one side. As the other side also, the people in that time also are disputing about which kind of regime to have in Sudan, a presidential one or a parliamentary one with the prime minister. And this also, the discussion went through until 1958. For all that reason, I think when we comment now and see the legacy of our 61 years of independence, we have to see where is the good sides and where is the positive sides and where is the negative side. I think globally, Sudan get his independence in a peaceful way. And the graduate conference was also built upon the example of the Congress of India. And through that, firstly, they begin as the elite, the graduate people from the Gordon College in that time, and the elite who were in the government, in the government of the colonization administration in that time, and to serve, firstly to serve their own needs as elite, as people in the government. But with the time, this got end to get a political agenda. And one also of the big mistake of our founder fathers, they didn't give a heed to the problem of South Sudan. And even when in 1953, when they signed the agreement with the British to withdraw, at that time the civil servant must be replaced by Sudanese. But unfortunately, they didn't get a good part also for the South Sudan people. Yes, indeed, in that time also, in the people in South Sudan were not that education is not very widespread. But that also one of the problem of the independence and colonization, because they use the policy of closed areas. So at the end of the day, they want to get South Sudan to be attached to Uganda or to Kenya. And in some area also in Darfur, in North Darfur, but for example, in Darzagawa area also, they put it as a closed area. Because in that time they try to Christianize the people in that area. When they refuse, they close it. So the seeds for the destabilization of Sudan were rooted even before we get our independence.
Okay, so also Mr. Nahar mentioned many things about his independence as you heard. Let me kick the ball to you. It is on your page now. It's about the constitution. Why the constitution never been built in Sudan? What's the reason? Is there any idea?
Firstly, because the elites who are who are being governing Sudan for all this long time, they never ever think of the ordinary people problems, and they never address the real problems of Sudanese in the context of law and supremacy of rule of law. The only when they talk, when they have a new government, they tolerate the text of the constitution according to their own interest. And when the successor government came up, if we get some analysis for these 11 amendments of the constitution since independence, we can see it's quite vivid that every government came, it changed and made it its own constitution. When we have independence, we have 1955 constitution, which is gone by this military coup, Abood 1958. Abood comes with a new constitution, like presidential decree, and when he left, this constitution been buried. And then from 1964, we have a constitution as Westminster model, and to serve the multi-political system. And when it is ended up in 1969, Nimeri buried the same constitution and tried to make his own constitution and call it later on a permanent constitution. And this permanent constitution also being neglected when we have a new political party, multi-party, what we call it the third democracy era. And they also neglected this Nimeri's permanent constitution and make some, not only amendment, they completely rejected this constitution and tried to make a new constitution by borrowing 64 constitution and to make some amendment, because one of these, when they made amendments, they amendments so as to draw out the Communist Party at that time. So we have 1964 constitution, and they call it a transitional constitution, and then we have in 1996 a constitution, as I said, by Nimeri, filled by presidential decrees, and up to 1971 we have 1974 we have a constitution reflecting the political interests of Nimeri regime, and then we have Addis Ababa Accord, which is also amends the constitution, and Nimeri said this is a permanent constitution. I do remember he saying he make a prefix saying that Addaim Allah, that means he is not strongly believes that it will be a real permanent constitution. And Nimeri, 1958, 1985, we have the uprising, which is as a result of throwing the Nimeri regime, and we have a multi-party system, the third democracy. They have their own constitution, which is reflecting the multi-political system, and they put their interest, the separation of powers and many values, but the competition was very high, and they tried to neglect some political parties, and then to cancel Sharia and some other amendments, which is very major, and they also tried to solve the problem of the South in the context which is quite different to national interest. And then we have salvation, which is the persistent regime in 1985, 1995 and 1989, and it came with a constitution also, which is reflected the political arena at that time. And then up to now we have what we call it the transition constitution, because in 2006 we have SPLA, CPA in 2005 and 2006, and the constitution was amended, and different agreements like Doha, other also been enshrined to the constitution. And then we have what we call it the transition constitution of 1999 and 1989, which is now tailoring and with a lot of amendments, and now we are approaching appealing for a permanent solution. All these amendments, and this is a long journey of building, trying and attempts to build a constitution reflecting the unpolitical rest of Sudanese arena. So the question, back to your question, why? Because we didn't recognize the previous government efforts. We don't adopt what our, I can say, the founder fathers or the successive governments and to stick. But now I think there is a chance for it. Now we have national dialogue, accommodated everybody, accommodated not everybody, because still there is some political parties and some armed forces, but at least addressing for the first time the cause of opposition, armed opposition or political opposition, and accommodate a lot of viaxa of political parties, which is I can say, reflecting the diversity of Sudan. So I myself, I'm looking, we are now heading to having a permanent constitution, and I expect that this time Sudanese shall build their own constitution, because as I mentioned, during all these successive governments, there is some foreign fingers that introduced into Sudanese political arena and try to put an interest. If you are affiliated to the Egypt, if you are affiliated to United Kingdom, or if you are just going back to your communist party with previous Soviet Union or whatever, it is there, all reflected in this constitution in the interest of political parties. But now Sudan, for different reasons, is pushed to have a permanent constitution. Firstly, because these political parties itself is not only the major player in the political arena. We have civil society, which is now going to replace the political parties, because the idea and the notion of political parties is ebbing away, and society is breathing with different lungs. It's called civil society, which is now catching up the political space. So no way Sudan is now heading to have a permanent constitution. Salute to our founder fathers with whatever merits or demerits they have committed. But anyhow, now we have our own flag. Now we have many attempts of trying to build a constitution. We have, I can say, some sort of political literature at least, and we have songs which are reflecting our martyrs and these founder fathers. In a nutshell, I can say that is why we haven't got a permanent constitution like everybody. And to end up, ordinary Sudanese, they don't bother about the constitution. We are not a community who is, because the constitution became for a long time is a business for the elites rather than ordinary people, because the ordinary people are not interested to separation of powers and the contradiction of the jurisdiction among the political institutions and so on. All this because the elites hijacked the political arena from the ordinary people and became a business of elites rather than ordinary people.
Just like a propaganda.
Yes, ordinary people, they don't bother to have a constitution that is look like a white, or they see it like a lady having a gold ornamented rather than reflecting the significance of the life.
Okay, so if I go to you, I did understand that what you said, it is a failure. If you agree with me, the first thing. The second thing, that successor after successor in the power in Sudan, and people now waiting for the resolutions, waiting for the aspiration of the people, looking forward to go forward in peace, because when he says that the absence of the constitution, because no any constitution found it, as we mentioned now, the absence of the constitution, that means the absence of the planning, the absence of peace, the absence of many things together. Just let me ask you to evaluate the first democracy of, for example, when the Al-Azhari handed up the flag of the independence.
As a problem with Sudan, as my colleague mentioned earlier, is this vicious circle. We didn't have a regime that lasted for more than 5 years in the past, except for the Inqaz, the Salvation Revolution, and even this Inqaz also, it went through cycles, because they began as a military coup. After that, with the war in South Sudan for the first decennia, they was also first decade they were internal struggle with the rebels in South Sudan, and after 2000 and after the CPA began another cycle of the inqaz, and after this national dialogue also this a new cycle, I think. So for the whole history of Sudan, there is no stable regime that lasted for more than 5 years. Either that is a military one or a civil one. For the first 2 or 3 years from the independence, the founding fathers, they did their best, I think, for that time and for that era and for that scene they found themselves. And you take also in consideration that in that time the sectarianism in Sudan and the sects were prevailed over other mean of political affiliation. So either you are a Ummah party, Ansar or Khatmiya, so there is no other choices. After the evolution with education, people began to adopt other cycles of ideologies, Islamism or the socialism or the communism and the other ISM. For all this, from 56 to 58, the first government, first democratic government, they spend their time in disputing who will be in the coalition. Ummah party sided with some people, and Ashiqa party also sided with people. At the end of the day, Abdullah Khalil in 58 handed the power to the military. Because, and for that, in that time also, if you see in retrospective what is going on that time, it is a chaotic situation, and was better that time this military regime to intervene. But the military regime also of General Ibrahim Abood didn't get the wide support from the people, and still the elite that were thrown from the power in 58 worked to overthrow them. And finally they get that in a popular revolution in 64. So the 2 or 3 years from the independence was only internal struggles about the power, about how to adopt a new constitution, and they failed to do that. But Sudan in that time was recognized as an independent state, and also in that time also the economy was smaller than now, and also it is not very modern in terms of its capacity. So the problem in Sudan also at that time were small, and the struggle of the elite, the political elite, and also the civil servant elite for their own things and for their own benefits, we put the Sudan away from having a real startup from the beginning.
So which is good to speak about that, but let me also evaluate the terms and the period of the power. People remain in the power. When I mentioned Ashari, that means I have to mention Abood, the first coup d'etat in Sudan.
Yes.
What happened?
Yes, when you talk about Abood, the period of governance from 1958 up to 1964, Abood tried to answer the question of the South, which was quite busy with linking up the South with the central Sudan via urbanization and Islamization of the South, and try to make some sort of development. And has succeeded to have aspects of development, which is the political party failed to do it. He built many sugar canes, sugar factories, and spread it, and multi-style and roads. But unfortunately, as colleagues stated, that those elites who have been cut off from exercising this political power, they never they still around and try to make pedophiles for Abood and push and mobilize the people on the streets so as to pull down Abood. And when Abood failed, we came to a new political arena, which is just a transitional period by Sir Khatim al-Khalifa in 1964. Sir Khatim al-Khalifa is not that mature politician, I'm sorry to say it, but anyhow he came like a trade union and get the power as representing the teachers at the time.
But I want to ask you, is there any achievement in the period of Abood? Do you think that's
there is? For the only development since independence that has been built in Sudan was during the Abood period. Before that, we haven't witnessed any kind of development. They're only made by our ex-colonizers. And since during of Azhari, nothing had been.
So you mentioned that also the elites forced Abood to resign.
Yes,
yeah,
by mobilizing the population.
So what's the reasons of that?
Simply because the fashion at that time is a Westminster model of governance. That means a parliament system, and the second is that they're daring for governance because they only until some others foreign fingers was tipped into that political arena without mentioning the names, but there is some others visible hands intruded into because Abood as a policy he driven off the Christian missions from the south, and there is some from the churches exerted some pressure on him and mobilized some other institution to. So from there, from the people, from the elites who are quite daring to have political power, and from but the ordinary people, they used when Abood left, they cheering Abood in the street after he handed over and resigned. Still, Abood gained more popularity, and everybody remember that the people in the market and ordinary people are cheering Abood that we need you to come back, and when you left we are being neglected, and because the development is being installed, and people never ever seen any kind of progress in, at least in the I can say in some aspects of development, like building schools or some institution, service institution, and so on.
So do you think that also Abood gained some kind of regional or international support from outside?
Abood visited the United States of America, and this is the first time United States of America paid the attention of United States of America, because Abood is reflecting the value of Sudanese people. I do remember when being asked by the United States by the President of the United States of America, like any African president visitor, to write down what he need, and he said, no, we don't write anything. We just came to politically to coordinate, and we come politically to show our support, because that time the world is divided into two poles, what you call Cold War. From that time, United States of America, which is all it is admin machine, they just started to think of Sudan. What is a country that is its presence with the United States of America, and beg no support, and beg no money, and beg nothing. I say, just I came here to salute and get back to my country.
Not just like other presidents.
No, every political or president visit the United States of America, he have what they call it a white paper.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go to you. I want to hear you comment about what we said. It's about the year of Abood, and then we can go forward. As we mentioned that from period to period.
Yeah.
How do you evaluate?
In generally, it was a positive era, and the real infrastructure in Sudan, even the railroad and the plants and factories and other infrastructure in Sudan, mainly built in that era of Abood. That from one hand. Yes, there is also the building of Sadd al-Ali, the dam, the Sadd al-Ali dam between Sudan and Egypt, and the compensation of the displaced people, and that was a little bit controversial because some people think they didn't trade it very well for Sudan. But generally, the era between 58 and 64 was stable for Sudan. Sudan has a good ties, and don't forget also in that time that the Cold War era, and it is very difficult to navigate in the political system in the world in that time without getting angry either from America or from the Soviet Union in that time. Sudan did navigate very well in that era, and also the stability was good, and also some beginning of some steps to solve the South Sudan problem. But the elite, as I mentioned before, also tried hard to get back, to get in grip with the power. It is very difficult to elite to be outside the power. So through the revolt that happened in 64, the so-called democratic regime come back again to Sudan, and through a technocrat government led by Sir Khatem Khalifa. And also we repeated again the same maneuver, the political maneuver between the different parties to get hold of the government, which one will lead the majority, which one gets this post, the other post, and the whole era of 64, 65 get the same way as before the Abood era. After the election, and I mentioned again that also the election.
So if I stand in this spot,
yes,
do you think that it is for the interest of the people or interest of the parties? Because you mentioned that the maneuvering, political maneuvering, that harmed the country. Is that just the people they need that to gain interest for themselves?
You know, they neglected in emphasizing the political maneuver and political partisan interest. They neglect the big picture of the Sudanese people. In that time, what's the Sudan problem that time? Firstly, is the peace problem of South Sudan, because in that time, Anyanya 1 are working, and the rebellion and in South Sudan was in full. And also the other thing, after the independence, is the problem of education, for example, of the development, and problem of health. There is some problems that concern the ordinary citizen of Sudan. The elite neglected all that and began to, this is prime minister, he has to be a prime minister, even he didn't reach the age of being prime minister. And this party also sent some deputies from Khartoum here to get elected, for example, from Darfur and the remote area. And also in that time, they neglected completely the aspiration of the peripheral part of Sudan. In Darfur, or in South Sudan, and in West Sudan, and in North Sudan, in Muba Mountain. And from that time also the Darfur front, and the Jibal Nuba front, and Abidjan conference, also all these groupings of regional grouping created in the area between 64 and 69, because the elite also felt this time to build a real unity, a real government that serves the interests of the people of Sudan, and the government that can help really to solve our biggest problem from the independence, which is the South Sudan problem.
Okay, so also he mentioned that your colleague distribution of the power. Is that still going on now? Because Sudanese people now, with this long period of time of experience, is trying to find a solution for the country and trying to get out from this dilemma of the country. But let me remain in the technocratic government, which is led by, as he said, that Muhammad Ahmad, which is led by Muhammad Ahmad. Okay, this government also has some kind of breathing spots. Do you think that it is going forward to the future of the Sudanese people, doing its best, doing enough for the Sudanese people, or as he mentioned that they are not doing their best for Sudanese people, so that no any foundation of democracy, no any foundation of stability, no any foundation of hotlines for the Sudanese people to go forward?
There is a question. All the armed opposition, when they came to negotiations, they mentioned the division of power, political power, and the wealth sharing. And this is never ever been mentioned in Addis Ababa Accord in 1971, which is quite clear that even the elites among the opposition parties, opposition groups, are perceiving all the struggles enshrined into the interests of the elites and the leaders. So the question of who is monopolying the political power and the wealth, and when we talk about, we are not talking about geographical areas, we are talking about themselves, because when they talk about political sharing, they are talking about having a political put, rather than talking geographical wise. Having these posts should be assigned to this political area, to this area or this tribe or this community. Well, it's the same. So we came to the conclusion that the interest of all or most of the armed opposition group is centered around sharing political power and sharing the wealth, rather than a glue for political development of Sudan, like having constitution, like how the way we govern Sudan, what is the political system suits Sudan interest, and so on. But now we came by national dialogue, which is have more than 360 around recommendations. For me, all this is a cause of armed opposition and political opposition also. So all the problems of Sudan since independence have been addressed. If you talk about the entity of Sudan, which is been fueling the conflict in Darfur or in South Kordofan, Blue Nile, or in Eastern Sudan, we are Africa or we are Arabs, and we are being neglected, and we are being marginalized, and we are not being well addressed, and this bundling of Arabism and Africanism, which is not going to unify us. It came these recommendations of national dialogue precisely identify Sudan as the Sudanese, which reflected everybody aspects of culture and entity. The second is that people are bundling about the way we can govern. It is Westminster model. It is a parliamentary system. It is whatever the system we are looking for. They came up with some recommendations, which is precisely saying that Sudan is a mixture, a multi-party system with a presidential, which everybody can compete through a political party and get a seat into the parliament, and then can form and participate in this government. The third pillar of this is the Bill of Human Rights. We know that this human rights is a very essential in the modern life, because excessive exercise of power from the government organs, we need some curbs, a law that can stop a police not to use excessive power, even military, whatever, to access power. There is a balance of the rights and duties, which is come with a fundamental human rights. So it is already there as recommendation. For the areas we've been suffering from less development, like Nuba Mountains, like Blue Nile, like Eastern Sudan, they have what you call it, the affirmative discrimination. Affirmative discrimination, reflected in Doha Peace Agreement, reflected into peace funds, which is established in Eastern Sudan, and extra consideration to the people of these areas, because simply they have been cut off from Sudan, Nuba Mountain for more than 25 years, Zagawa in Darfur for the same period. In Eastern Sudan, they have the same negligence as the cause of conflict. So, and different other recommendations, which is reflecting the real cause of intolerance, political intolerance of Sudanese ordinary people. So, this is why I can say this national dialogue, and also being recognized by the armed opposition who signed a roadmap for the peace in SPLA and also in Addis Ababa. So this national dialogue outcome should not be, this is, I've been saying here, I came here and said before, that should not be shrined into only political participation. It should be perceived as a major step towards political modification of Sudan. That means we were looking for 2020 free elections. Whatever the political party that gain more support can come and rule. Secondly, that is we should depict Sudan in a different aspects, because foreign policy is quietly defined also to reflect the interest rather than the ideology. Because sometimes when we talk about our policy, as I said to you before, when the communists is there, they just affiliated to Soviet Union, which is the great Soviet Union, because they reflect their ideology. And when in some arena, when Al-Mahdi, when Al-Tahaddum Unity Party, they affiliated to Egypt, and we have what they call it the strategic alliance of foreign policy. But now, yeah, this recommendation said clearly that the foreign policy should reflect the interest of Sudanese
people. So, Dr. Hussein Karshom, I got a sign that the time is over here, and I would like to thank you, because we have many things that we never come past, we've never passed on it. It's about the era of Sadiq al-Mahdi and Numeri, and also the Salvation Government. We hope that we have another episode to talk about all these kind of and the experiences of the Sudanese people in the independence and getting them until we come to the peaceful coexistence between all Sudanese people. I would like to thank you also, Nahar.
Thank you very much.
Nahar,
thank you.
Political analyst, and also Dr. Karshom.
Thank you.
I would like to thank you again,
thank
and
you.
I appreciate your time. And for you, dear viewers, that is all what we have in our episode, Dialogue Horizon. Until we meet again, goodbye.